Awesome. You guys like this morning's session?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So it's kind of nice to do this one right after, because we'll get some similarity to what you saw this morning to what we're going to do this afternoon in the very first haircut, especially because we're going to go a little bit more like a medium to long men's haircut, and then we'll keep going shorter and shorter and crop it down to more of a fade. So, I know you guys are relatively new to Studio B, but give me by each person how long you've been doing hair. You can count school. That's good.
I graduated in November of last year.
Okay.
So, and I was in school for a year. So a year and a half.
That sounds good.
Yeah,
A year and a half, yeah.
Year and a half.
outside of school, it's been about 8 months. Outside of well, not that long.
Yeah, a year.
It's all about the same. Really, the most difficult part about men's hair is how short it is,
Yes.
right? So usually when people are newer to doing hair, the reason they have such difficulty is because it's so short, it feels aggressive, and every mistake you can see it immediately. So that's the beauty about working with mannequin heads, is you got to give yourself that freedom to just go ahead and screw one up every once in a while. It's okay. This mannequin head is not paying for this haircut. We're going to go through a few specific tools that we're going to use. And if you don't have one of these things, obviously we can modify to make it work. Not a big deal. But like this morning, we used 2 different pairs of scissors. You know, one that's a little shorter and one that's a little longer. So whether you're doing detail hair cutting, I always tend to drop towards a shorter scissor just because it keeps my work cleaner. Or if I'm going to do a little scissor over comb, I like a longer scissor just to be able to make that easier to work with. Obviously, we talked about different colored combs depending on the hair you're working with, but I also still like for the texture. So when you're dealing with something, like I said earlier, like a YS part, it tends to be a little bit more rigid, and then they can break, even though they're a very, very high quality comb. They're just designed for fine detail work. So short hair cutting, things that make it really simple. As soon as you get into hair where you're going to be a bit more aggressive and work with a lot of hair at once, I tend to switch more towards like a fiberglass, like we were talking about, and these won't snap, and they're still really good for fine hair cutting. So a good all around. The other main comb that we're going to wind up using is just, it's called a barber comb, and it's really just designed for working with clippers. And the main reason you use this when it comes to clippers is because depending on the size of the clipper you're working with, the comb is wider than the blade. So if you're working clipper over comb and you're using a smaller comb, the blade will stick out beyond the teeth and can actually gouge into your haircut and give you bad results. So we're going to use clipper comb for small detail work, but then also we're going to remove a bulk amount of hair with this to get it going. There's 2 different types of main clippers that I'll use. For this haircut specific, it doesn't necessarily matter what you use. It's all about preference. But the first type we're going to go over, this is called the detachable blade clipper. And all that really means is, you notice there's no blade on the end because you can buy the blades in varying sizes and they attach to the clipper. So this would be considered what they call a 3.5. And the reason it's a 3.5 is because this is the cutting blade here. So the thickness between the cutting blade and what would touch the scalp is what makes it either a big blade or a small blade. And they come in varying degrees of size, all the way down to, this one is called the 5-0. And you can see how thin that is. That's almost like shaving with a razor blade. And the cutting blade on the inside, and it's just the finest little teeth to help protect you across the skin. So a detachable blade clipper tends to be much more aggressive because there's a lot more teeth to each blade. You'll get a really clean cut and it's really fast, right? So when you get to these, a lot of people get fear factor from them, but I love the clean haircut you can get from a detachable blade clipper. The next clipper we'll use, it's an adjustable blade clipper. And what that really means is there's a little lever on the side that will pull the cutting blade further away from the skin, so it's slightly thicker, or push it all the way close to the skin, right? So that's all that moves is that interior cutting blade, and you can see it drawing away or pushing closer. And that allows you to get blends in those very short variables from one blade to the next. Without a guard on it, they're also extremely aggressive. But once you put on one of the plastic guards, it can soften up the haircut to whatever size you want it to be. And these come all the way to like an 8, which is ridiculous because if you're cutting that long, just put it in your fingers and cut it. It's my own personal preference. But obviously, like this is a 1.5 guard that's on there now. But if I pull the lever all the way out, now it's technically a 2. And if I push the lever all the way in, now it's a 1.5. So to have the ability to blend between the length of a 2 and a 1.5 with one blade on is why this lever is so important. Especially later on when we get into fading, because once you start working without a guard, to be able to have that ability is very, very nice. Now, the teeth on all of these protective combs are wide apart. So you don't get as clean of a haircut as you do with the detachable blade, but it is a little softer and less aggressive, and people tend to prefer them when they're first starting because you see less mistakes, which is always nice. And then the last clipper we'll use is some form of trimmer. And a trimmer is just a tiny blade clipper. Right? It's nice and small. They cut really short, but they're short for working around like ear or a hairline or fading off very, very, very short hair. They're not aggressive enough or powerful enough to mow through a lot of hair at once. They do have some nicer, newer trimmers out on the market that can do that, but they'll cost you. So you got to be willing to invest when it comes to men's hair because it's very tool specific. And then after that, we'll use just a little clipper brush when we're really short to help blend off any bits and pieces of hair that can give you shadows. Because once you start cutting hair really, really, really short, that's what you're doing is you're working shadows. It's less about perfect length blending and more about visual blending. And those brushes can really help kind of give you that cleanliness. Well, any questions about tools, like maybe something you're missing or something you're interested in getting into, we can throw that out right now as well.
I just have a question because I feel like our clippers are kind of the same ones. And I noticed like on the side right there where you can adjust it, there's little notches. Is that like, I mean, I don't know if they're there for a reason or not, I guess is what I'm saying. But like just adjusting, like when you're doing a fade and you want it to be really tight, like is that what those little notches are for? Or am I just making that up?
No, that's exactly what they're for. Basically, the one I showed you, there is no notch. So like in my mind, I have to understand how short am I making it with every push.
Yeah.
Whereas with yours, it'll kind of lock into 1 shorter, 2 shorter, 3 shorter, right? So every time you push a notch, you're just a little bit shorter. The other thing I like about the notch style, these, because they don't have a notch over time, that pivot screw will tend to loosen up, and the vibration of the clipper, it'll change position on its own. So those could be dangerous as well. So the notch style is actually a really good thing. But maintenance is important because the same thing will happen, and over time those notches won't work anymore because the blades will become loose. So getting really familiar with even just the most basic of how to oil your blades and then how to retighten all the things as they go. Because obviously when you turn these on, the vibration over time is going to loosen up anything that's holding it into place.
Yeah.
So it's just, one more little effort. It's basically just like your scissors. When you're working throughout the salon week, every day you should be wiping these off in between clients. And then at least once a week, you should be oiling and taking really good care of them. I tend to put a little dab of oil on my blades every day because I use them quite a bit, right? And when you work that back and forth long enough, not only can the pivot screw become loose, but then the little bits and pieces of hair that get caught underneath the blades will slowly grind the metal and make your scissors less sharp and less connectable. So anything you work with in the salon, you want to slowly learn more and more and more about maintenance and how to take care of them, because it'll just make your life better and make your tools last longer. And after a while, it gets out of control. Like, you're going to wind up with thousands of dollars of things. And people will question you and wonder, like, why do you own 10 pair of scissors? And first off, it's because we become addicted and we love scissors. But you do tend to find detail work where you're like, I love this one for this, I love this one for that, right? And that's just the way everything works in life. And same with combs. Like that YS Park comb that I was telling you about, that's really, they're exceptional combs, but these are $10 to $12 a piece depending on where you buy them. And when you tell somebody you paid $12 for one comb, they kind of get a little freaked out about it. It's pretty funny. You know, whereas like these little Sessabon combs, these are about $6 a piece, but I see the value in having something that makes my work cleaner and smoother. So as you progress, it'll just get more and more different as to what you like versus what you don't like. And the beauty about working in a salon full of other people is every once in a while you should ask somebody to borrow theirs and see if that fits you good, if it's the right kind of blade for you, if it's the right kind of comb for you. And then you build a feeling of what you like based off of that. So all that being said, let's just get into cutting some hair. Like I said, there'll be some similarity to what we did earlier and then to what we do now. The changes are going to be removing the femininity out of the haircut. So all of those little bits and pieces that we left, the edginess, the softness, we're going to take quite a bit of that away from our men's hair cutting, because what makes it more masculine tends to be the more squared off features, right? So working with the round of the head to build more square, or working with the curvatures of heads to build more density. It's all about pushing yourself to seeing face shape a little differently. Now, I've obviously got a male mannequin head, so they've made it look like a cartoon where he's got a big chiseled jawline and a fatter head. So there's more area to work with, which in some cases can be important, but sometimes it's just a little overkill. But we all discussed earlier, when we did our layered side, we divided the hair higher up on the parietal ridge. And when we did our graduated side, we did lower on the parietal ridge. What I tend to look at on men's hair more importantly is the density of hair on the top of the head will tell me where I divide. Meaning if a guy comes in and he's balding, or he has a deep indentation where his hair is receding, I tend to drop my elevation or my guide a little lower to maintain as much hair on top so that I can make that look thicker and fuller. Whereas if they've got Chewbacca hair and that Guido hairline that comes across their eyebrows, obviously I want to pick that up a little bit more and get rid of hair so they don't look like Eddie Munster. So it's just about visualizing what it is from that person, what you want to get. Now, on this haircut, we're going to get a little bit more symmetrical. So we'll do an entire haircut, and then we'll come back and we'll do another entire haircut. But who was our left-handed girl again? Is that Alicia? Okay. So Alicia, I'm going to start on the right side of the head. Do me a favor, just start on the left side of the head so our hand position will be the same. So first things first, I'm going to come right to the parietal ridge, and I'm going to do that same sectioning that we did where we carved all the way through to the low crown. So I've combed everything in that direction, and I'm going to follow that natural curve of the head and just drive all the way through to the low crown, allowing the section to dip a little bit lower in the back. And I use these as almost kind of standardized sections, but when you start really cutting a lot of men's hair, you'll modify this from one guest to the next. These are just good starting points for what we want to do. And I do tend to just focus on one side at a time because it's going to make my life a lot easier. So just taking one clean section, driving all the way across the parietal ridge. And I'm really only focused on the one side of the head right now. All right, looks like we're just about there. So here's the tools we're going to start with. I want my clipper comb and then just a large pair of clippers. Okay, we're just going to get this party started right away. Sometimes I feel like if you could just get aggressive with it and go for it, then it takes all the fear factor out and we can have some fun. So here's what we're going to do. Because all of our heads have varying degrees of length to play off of, we're going to set a guideline that drives all the way across that parietal ridge using our clipper. And then we're going to switch into our scissor and finish off the haircut. So what I'd like to do for this first haircut is we're going to leave a little bit of length, enough to where your mannequin head would have something to brush, right? So picture how short it can go, but still have enough to where when you run your hands through it, it gets some movement. And then the way we'll start.
If we don't have a clip comb,
Yeah.
what should we do?
So just be careful.
Okay.
And what I'm going to show is I'm going to take my comb and I'm going to gather the hair straight up to where it's coming directly off of the parietal ridge. Can you see that? So where my clipper comb is big enough, that's not as important because I'm really just cutting that one line right now. But the important part is if I drop this, I'm going to graduate the very top of the section. But if I come straight off the line, it'll be a layer. I know it's that subtle of a change, but it makes a big difference. So we're going to gather all the hair straight up towards the parietal ridge. Make sure I'm coming directly off of it at the length that I want it to be. And then we're just going to fire it up and set a guideline. Easy enough, right? Follow that same line. You see, I'm just going to spin the head so you can see the back. So now I'm going to gather more hair, but also enough of the front to where I can see my target. And then continue all the way through. And then do that until I'm all the way on the opposite side of the head. So comb follows the section all the way up. There's my target. Get that hair going. So what you should be wound up with is the ugliest mullet you've ever seen. All right, maybe not the ugliest you've seen, but pretty bad. All right, everybody should have that section done. So basically what we've done now is directly across that parietal ridge, we now have a guideline to help us cut everything underneath it. Okay, so we've created a really strong layer. So now we want to go through and remove all the excess hair using the very top of that panel as our target. So I'm going to start right in the front. I'm going to work vertical sections, so straight up and down. And I'm going to travel all the way back to cross the center back. And I'm going to use the very top of that section as my guideline and cut straight up and down. So I'm going to reposition here just so you can see well. Mannequin height is important because I don't want to cut with my arm too far up in the air. It's going to get uncomfortable. So I'm just going to take vertical section. You can see my target right there in my knuckles and cut a flat line straight up and down. And then I'll scoot back a section. Straight up and down. Now, I'm actually using improper body position, but I'm trying to get to where you can just see that panel to start. What you'll notice is there's going to be a bunch of different ways you can feel good about this style of cutting. So like Alicia, I'm watching you cut on top of your fingers. And that's actually like an old school barber way of doing this specific haircut. And where it stemmed from, and it's not incorrect, by the way, I'm not calling you out on it, is the distance that you would keep from the gentleman in front of you. Because traditionally you had male barbers and male clients. So they could stand behind and cut, but then they would work the other side from the same position. Whereas a lot of times as hairstylists, what we do is we get right on top of people, right? So our distance between the guest and us is really close. And that was never a big comfort zone for men. So modern day cutting, we're more worried about the precision of the haircut than we are that old school feel of client comfortable. So whether you choose to stand behind and work on top of your fingers or choose to stand right in front of your work and work in your fingers, I'm okay either way. But what we want to do is, once we get past the ear, we're going to continue working vertical and all the way down. And what I would recommend is where the hair curves or the head curves in, allow your fingers to curve just a little bit so we don't work that weird little tuft of hair towards the base. So just keep taking vertical sections, working straight up and down, using the very top as your guide. So you can see you should have a guide from what we cut with the clipper, as well as a guide from your previously cut section. And then allow your fingers to fold in with the head shape. So this is going to be that standard like business style haircut. The men that come in that aren't looking for clippers on the side of their head, but they do want a good short, clean cut haircut. It's just enough to where they can put a little bit of product in and work the hair backwards so it has some movement. This is back to that conversation from this morning where you do have to let your feet walk with you. So as you round around the head shape, you don't want to over direct the hair forward and get too much length. You just want to direct straight out from where the hair grows. So if your body walks around the head as you're working, you won't leave too much length. Keep your vision on both of your target lines, both the original line we created with the clipper following the parietal ridge and your previously cut section. All right, so I'm starting to see you guys finishing up there. So this morning, when we cross-checked that one panel, we used that little bit of scissor over comb just to double check our work. It's almost impossible when you're working vertically like this and you're pinching the hair with your fingers, not to direct hair from the forward back and from the back forward. So you should wind up with some little peaks and valleys inside of this as you're working. And all you want to do is go back through with your scissor over comb and look for those little peaks of weight and trim that off. You shouldn't be altering the haircut itself. You're just making sure that you don't see those little peaks and valleys inside the hair. And by coming straight horizontal at the hair, you're basically doing the opposite of what you just did in your fingers cutting vertical. It's just enough to make sure that everything's nice and clean. This is where you'll find little differences between how a barber is trained and how a cosmetologist is trained. As a cosmetologist, we tend to grip our comb, right? So when we work through things, we've got a good, strong control of it. As a barber, they're trained to use a C-shaping with their hand to hold their comb. So they have the flexibility to flip down and comb and then flip up to guide. So as your scissor over comb, you can flip down to comb through the hair to get a good clean movement, and then flip back up to ride with the blade. And that's the type of dexterity that takes a little bit of time to work with and get comfortable. So just like anything else, when we were talking about the one single blade moving, I spent a lot of time holding my hand still and just practicing that thumb motion. And it took a long time to really get to where I could just hold my hand straight up and work it without any trouble. So knowing that the top blade should move and the bottom blade should stay still, you can hold the bottom blade and work that just to keep the thumb in position until you can do it without. And it's the same with the comb. I would catch myself having conversations with people, and while they're chatting, I'm just working that motion. Just getting comfortable with that little bit of a flip to where I knew when I was working, I could just keep that motion going. All right, so we should be good on that side. So now what we're gonna do is just the opposite. We're gonna move to the other side of the head. And I wanna now drive from the center of that parietal ridge all the way back to the front just to get my section ready. So I'm just gonna put my finger where I wanna end, my comb where I wanna begin, and you'll just, for some weird reason, it always goes straight to your finger. Just to give you the panel we wanna work with here. And then we'll clip that hair out of the way to the other side. So now where we set our guideline in with our clippers before, what I'd like to do just to switch it up and do something different is let's set the same guideline in, but with our scissor. So scissor over comb. So I'm gonna start towards the back where I know I've got the length that I wanna be. And I'll use my comb the same way we did before with the clipper comb. We'll elevate all the way up till we sit that length. And then instead of using the clipper, I'm just going to use the scissor to take it down to where I want it to be. And I'll work that all the way to the front. So this just really helps. It sets a guideline for where the longest length is, but then it also gets your scissors moving and gets rid of a bunch of the weight that you don't want to have to deal with through the haircut. Now we're going to repeat what we did on the opposite side. The only difference is, since we're starting from the front moving backwards, now my fingertips are going to be pointing down. Whereas on the other side of the head, my fingertips were pointing up. Okay. And that just comes to that comfortability. So now my right leg is forward, my fingertips are pointing down, I'm hitchhiking my way through the haircut, and then I'm going to use that top guide to set in our length. And I'll work all the way through to the back. Pulling out from where the hair naturally grows. And then once I'm behind the ear, make sure to let my fingers follow the curvature of the head shape so that we have a similar length through the bottom as we do through the top. And we're going to run that all the way through past the center back to make sure that the two sides blend well together in the middle. And what should happen is as you progress towards the center back, you should just slowly run out of hair to cut. Now, while you're working, when you're done with that section where we did scissor over comb on one side, what I'd like to do is do clipper over comb on this side for our cross check. So this is why I want to switch to that wide clipper comb so that it's easy for me to be able to guide across that comb and get a good smooth surface. So the teeth of the comb are going to follow straight up like our fingers did and guide the hair into place. And the clipper blade is going to run directly across the spine of the comb, nice and smooth to get a good clean cut. And I'm just looking for those little bits and pieces, those peaks and valleys to cross check off to make sure we get a good image. So this way you can get comfortable cross-checking either scissor over comb or clipper over comb. Like we were talking about with the Pixie haircutting, I like to put as many different feelings into one technique so that you can really start to wrap your mind around them all. Because there is no one size fits all. What works for one person is different for another. Just remember to keep the teeth of the comb straight up and down, because that's basically the teeth of the comb are like your fingers and the clipper is your scissor. So obviously if the fingers are angled, you'll get an angled haircut. If the clipper teeth are angled, you'll get an angled haircut. All right, so it should still look a little thick around the edges because we're going to detail that out towards the end of the haircut. But now we're going to progress on to the top. Any questions about the bottom before we move on?
I just have a minute to catch up. Sorry.
Of course, yeah, no rush. I'll apologize. I tend to cut men's hair very fast. Most of my men's haircuts are done within about 7 minutes behind the chair. Obviously, you want to take a little time with the style, and the shampoo is always the best part. But the haircut itself, you just get really comfortable with these, and they move really quickly. And I find the nice thing about cutting men's hair behind the chair is obviously you can get men in and out of the salon in a small time frame, but it helps you become more aggressive with your women's hair cutting. So if you want to do a lot of shorter pixies, the more short hair you cut, the more confident you get about cutting short hair. Of course, good standard vertical sections on men's hair cutting keeps the bottom nice and lean. It sits a little closer to the head shape. You don't tend to see lines in the haircut when you cut vertically. Like I said earlier, when you cut horizontal, you do tend to put bars inside unless you're really clean with your work. So it takes practice. Which the beauty of being in our industry is every guest that sits in your chair is just practice for the next one. How are we looking over there? That was not the face of confidence.
I think I'm okay.
Okay, good. That's not bad. It's just one of those things. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. So to progress on from there, we're going to start in the crown. So all I'm going to do is just take a nice clean division line from ear to ear, just to separate off that little triangular segment in the back. And this is where we're going to start building the shape of the front of the haircut. Most of men's haircutting, all the fun parts of the haircut are done through the top. All the detail work is usually done through the sides and the bottom. I'm going to spin the mannequin head so you guys can see the back. The shape we're going to create is square. And all that really means is you're going to pull all the hair directly back towards the wall behind him, right? So back from where his hair grows, and we're going to create a flat square shape. So I'm going to start vertically right in the center, just a small enough section to make a good clean haircut. We're going to utilize the length that we set in from the very beginning. And I'm going to do this from a couple of different angles so that you can see it. I just wanted you to see the direction coming straight back from the head shape. And then I'm going to cut straight up and down from what we just created. So cutting to the second knuckle, repositioning my hands, and continue the haircut. So from the side, the way that's going to look, I'll move one section closer to you guys, which means my fingers now have to scoot slightly closer to the camera so that I can pull straight back from the head. So it's not to the center. To the center, we create triangular shape. We want to go straight back from the head and now use my first slice as my guideline for the second. You can see the hair is coming straight off the head, straight back, and cut up and down. Every time I move a slice towards the camera, my fingers have to move towards the camera so that I pull straight back from the head. So it's as if he leaned his head back and all the hair was just flowing directly back from his head shape. And what that's going to do is allow the hair to get slightly longer towards the corner of the haircut. So when I turn this towards you again, you should be able to see a subtle weight line moving down, heavier towards the corner. Now we're going to repeat the same on the other side. The only difference is now where I was combing from the outside in towards the guide that I was using, now I have to comb from the outside in towards the guide that I'm using. So the center is the guide again. I'm going to gather the hair by combing from the outside in. But what that prevents me from doing is directing the hair towards me, which would round off my square shape. I want it to stay nice and flat. So every slice gets combed towards the guide instead of the guide getting combed towards the section. Once I start combing the guide away from where it lives, the hair is going to get dramatically shorter. Now to cross-check that section, you should just be able to pull it flat off the head shape, straight back, and you should have a nice, flat, clean line, creating that square shape across the back. this is that moment where if it's skewed, if it gets longer, then you know that you directed in too much. If it gets shorter, that means you round it off with the head shape instead of pulling flat back. So like we were talking about earlier with the Pixie haircuts, sometimes you want to see those types of things so that you can now correct your style of haircutting to get exactly what you want. How's everybody's looking? Are you getting that square shape?
Can you show how to cross-check to make sure that it's square?
Of course. So what you'll watch, you're looking at the back of the head. If I comb straight back, my fingers should be flat like a square would be. And I just want to see that flat line. How's it look?
It's a little curved, I think.
It's got a little subtle gangster lean. That's not bad. Like I said, that's where you know that's the part you want to practice, right? But when I look at it from the side, obviously a square is a flat line, but what it does on a piece of a round head is it'll create length, like a peak of weight. So if I look at that from the sideline, it's going to show me what, if I kept going the way we were going right now, how long would it be when it gets to the front? That's what that's going to visualize. So this is going to help you understand, do I want to keep moving that way, or was the square too strong, right? So to level that through to the front, we're going to stand on the side of the head. We're going to start with a center section, just like we did in the crown, but we're going to go horizontal. So I'll take my center slice. I'm going to use what we just did in the crown as a guide to start. But then where you'll want to make any kind of shift and change is this is going to save length in the front of the head. So if you see, show you the angle here, what I just cut in the crown is creating this angle right here. If I kept going on that angle, the front is going to be ridiculously long. I don't want it to be quite that long. My fingers are going to tell me how long, right? The higher I raise my elbow, the longer the front's going to live. So you choose to what length you want it to be. But I'm going to come straight up and down from the head. I'm going to grab a piece of my guide from the crown, and I'm going to use my elbow to show me how long I want the front to be. And then we're going to cut that straight through, reposition our fingers once we get to our second knuckle, and keep cutting until we make it all the way through to the front line of the haircut. As I move, I'm cutting from the center to the right side of the head. I'm going to continue pulling straight up from where it lives. So just like in the back where we pulled straight back to create a square, we want to pull straight up from the head, but our finger angle will go short in the crown to long in the front. So I should get a flat top that's longer in the front and and shorter in the back. And we'll be able to know that when we cross-check how well we did. But this is another key element, is why we have mirrors at our station. It's not for the guests to look at themselves. It's for us to look at our body position, our hand position, our direction, our elevation, to make sure that we're getting the cut that we're shooting for. There's always going to be a position where you have to stand that you can't see the direction you're moving without having the assistance of a mirror. So very similar to what we did in the Pixie this morning, where we're completely disconnected from the side. And then just like we did in the crown, once I'm done with the center to right, I need to go center to left. But I'm not going to change my body position. I'm only going to change the way I comb, because I want to be able to cut the hair from short to long. So I'll re-pull my center section so that I can see my guide. And then I'll add from center to left a segment to cut. And I'll comb from the outside towards the guide and create the same target line that we've just been using. Now I find when I'm on this side, it's easier for me to see my combing direction, so I know that I'm combing straight up from the scalp, because I'm watching the hair come up from the head shape. So this side tends to be my easier when it comes to the elevation of the hair. It's the combing that tends to be a little bit more difficult for people on this side. So once you have that line where you like it, your cross check, you can just sweep all the hair to one side of the head, just to make it easy to do a vertical section, and then elevate that vertical section straight up from the head. And what you want to see is a flat line from right to left. And then of course you can just continue to progress forward. And every time you elevate straight up into the air, just a good clean line from side to side. All right, and we all should be pretty close to that. Any questions on where we are? Everybody's came out relatively flat on top. So there's a lot of options in a haircut like this where obviously we left a lot of length in through the top, but I like them tremendously disconnected like this, but it doesn't mean you couldn't take off more weight if you wanted. You know, you could easily come back through and soften the amount of length. But first I want to do some detail work. So if you've got a good pair of trimmers, go ahead and grab those and a small comb. I'll use the white one so you guys can see where we're at. You can see this could be brushed into a really killer pompadour very easily. So we're going to use our trimmers and just work around the edges of the haircut. But I like to use my comb to guide myself because it protects me from making any unwanted mistakes. So what I like to do is work all the way around the entire perimeter of the haircut. And basically what you're doing is you're graduating. You're cutting it short on the outside and leaving it long on the inside. So it tapers all of this excess length. So I use my comb like a ruler, and I'm going to come right in front of the sideburn. So if you watch this, I'm just going to hold the comb and push the hair straight forward, and it's going to follow the hairline. So I'm going to push the hair forward, and then I'll trim the excess hair out of the way. So push the hair forward, trim the excess, and push the hair forward and trim the excess. So I'm literally just following the shape of the hairline so that when I comb that through, it blends a little softer instead of having that big peak of weight right in the front. Obviously, you can cut the sideburns to whatever length you choose. And then I'm going to work all the way around the ear. So in the same manner, I'm going to hold my comb and push the hair beyond the hairline around the ear and just use the trimmer to clean that up. So in front of the ear, on top of the ear, and then behind the ear, allowing the trimmer to just glide around the hairline. Now, obviously, if this is a person, the ear would move. So I can hold the clipper and use one finger to bend the ear out of the way, and then pivot right around to make that nice and clean. But follow that all the way around the whole hairline, so even all the way down to the nape, letting the trimmer do all the work. And you can see all of a sudden that sits nice and clean to the head shape. And I would do that to the opposite side as well. So I'll showcase that same feeling. So in the front, follow the hairline, which on most of these mannequin heads, they'll have kind of a diagonal forward and then a diagonal back and then a straight down for the sideburn. So just allow your comb to do the same shape that's there. And then right in front of the sideburn. And then I can go behind the sideburn, above the ear, behind the ear, and then all the way down towards the nape. Trim the sideburn to whatever length you like. And then there's the hairline all the way across the back. Sometimes people like to just stamp that in. I like, if I'm going to leave it a little longer, I don't like it to be a hard line. So I'll probably just use my comb to get under the hair and just soften it. So I can get rid of the bulk of the hair, but it doesn't leave a big, harsh, like stamped in line. Because the harder you stamp that line in, it's going to take a while for it to grow and get softer. And then when it does grow, you see the regrowth immediately. Whereas you can see just that little bit of elevation with the comb allows that to live softer but cleaner. So I'm just going to show a little cleanup just on that weight line that we produced by elevating all the hair up from the head shape. And all I'm going to do is visualize the length in the front and the length in the back and how much I want to keep and how much I want to get gone. And in my head, I think somewhere around that length would be quite nice, just enough to soften it. So I'm going to gather the disconnection of my fingers, visualizing that my fingers are pointing towards the length I want to save. And I like to just point cut through this a little bit so that it's not a blunt line, because a blunt line sitting on top of our disconnection would be strong. And if you can point cut it a little softer, it tends to blend better. And then just move forward and follow that same position until you make it all the way through the hair in the front. Of course, what I do to one side, I should do to the other, just to make sure they blend well. So I'll spin the head around. I'll recomb all the hair to the opposite side. And then I'll visualize the same line and then point cut it in. And you'll notice, just like we talked about in the last class, I'm still using the still blade and only point cutting, pulling away from my finger. Making sure to protect me from the blade. And that gives me that weight all the way through to the front of the haircut, but it just falls a little softer. So from that perspective, even just a quick brush through, you can see the shape and the softness of that haircut. Total disconnect from the underneath to the top. I'm going to use just a small amount of grooming cream from Maverick. I love this one for damp hair. Always remember to show people how much you use. Just a little bit goes a long way. This is an exceptional cream that'll give a little control, but not too much, because this is the kind of haircut you're going to want to be able to run your hands through. You don't want to get stuck with this one to where it's in one place. Plus, I love the texture that the grooming cream will give. You can get a little bit of movement and volume out of it, but then it's moldable. So if I want to just wear it, brush through, you can see how that's going to fall. If you want to part it from one side to the other, you'll still have enough disconnect on both sides to where you get a blend. If the mannequin stand doesn't go crazy on you. And then, like we talked about earlier, if I really wanted to, I could blow this up into a pompadour and have a really good high top movement on the top of the head. But the sides are short enough to comb straight through. So it's a good standard, easy men's haircut for more of that medium length. We didn't clip her off the sides. We just used our fingers straight up and down to get a nice vertical movement. We came flat through the crown, straight up and down to get that square shape. And then we moved that same flatness and went short to long through to the front. Any questions on that haircut specific or any of the techniques involved in it?
How would you adjust it if they had a really bad like cowlick in either the front or the back, like where their whorl was?
Traditionally, when you get one in the front, it's going to be somewhere along this hairline, right? So by leaving this weight, the only thing that would be the adjustment is it would naturally want to part wherever their cowlick is. So this actually works really good for that because there's enough length on either side of the cowlick to where you can brush it and still get a good image out of it. So that one's not too bad. The other one is traditionally you get a swirl. See, this one usually would have one, but it would probably be dead center in the crown or somewhere in that crown range. Since we decided to pull this one flat, we maintain enough length in the crown to where we shouldn't get much disturbance from a swirl. If you look like it's going to be trouble, the biggest trick is all or nothing. You either need to leave that crown longer so the hair has enough weight to control around it, or you need to cut it off to where you want it to round short through that swirl, and then it doesn't affect it too bad. But another good trick on that one is wherever the swirl is, take out a circular section around it and cut that independent once everything else is finished. So basically you can blow dry it into place and then carve that swirl to fall the way you want it to fall. But normally with a haircut like this, because it is more of that kind of medium length, longer pompadour feel, you're not going to have issues with crown. Now, on the next one, you definitely will, because we're going to cut it off.
Cool.
Any other questions on this one? You guys feel comfortable with that? Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, let's cut it all off then. Now that you put all that effort into it. Now, because of the way we just cut this, it should be very, very easy. We're going to go right back to the side of the head. So we're just going to take a comb and brush all of that long out of the way, which will give us that same division line where we were before. And you don't necessarily have to clip it. You can just kind of push it over, and we'll work on one side at a time. If you do have any spaces that are going to give you some trouble, you can definitely clip them so that they won't drive you crazy. I like to use these little Velcro bits just because the shorter the hair gets, the harder it is to fit a clip in there. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with a longer blade. I'm going to use my detachable blade clipper with a 3.5. Now, my goal is to set myself a weight line that I don't want to clipper over top of. So we're going to start long and blend our way down to short. So the way that's going to work is that line where the head drops down, I want to follow that little bit of a dip through the back with the blade, because the blade is going to carve straight to where I want it to live. So when I start my 3.5, I'm just going to run a small flick-like motion with my wrist so that I'm pulling away from what I want to save. So as I cut, I'm going to go short in and then pull away. Okay? Now, I'm showing it to you more extreme. It's really just a small motion to make sure that the blade cuts what I want and doesn't cut what I don't want. When it comes to things like ears, since it's hard to get above the ear and then work the position you want, you can go on an angle, but remember, I'm trying to leave it long on top and short on the bottom, so my blade now also has to go on an angle. So I'm going to ride across this one tooth and just slide around the ear, so that I'm protecting the length on the top by moving the top of the blade away from it. But I can still get the cut that I want. So what you'll notice as I work towards the back, I'm going to allow the line to dip down towards the nape of the neck. You'll see a lot of barbers will take a comb and they'll push down on the hair above, and the comb stops where you want the clipper to stop cutting. And it just helps them control all that hair that they're trying not to get through. Now, because I want to fade this down really tight, I'm going to switch up my 3.5 blade. I'm going to move down to a 2. So the change up between 3.5 to 2 is not a major switch, and it's easy to blend with your hands. But if my finger is living where I stopped with the 3.5, I need to come just below that with my 2. If I drive my 2 all the way up into the 3.5, I'm going to cut it shorter. So it's 3.5, 2, 1.5, 1A, 1, right? I'm just going to slowly stair step my way all the way down as I change my blades. So now with the 2, my little flick is going to come right below where I just was. And if I have to go around the ear, here again, I'm just going to ride on that one tooth on the edge and just carve that nice and clean. So just cutting right below where the 3.5 went so that the 2 melts into the 3.5. Then I can drop down another blade. So this is a 1.5. The 1.5 has to come right below the 2. I can't go above it because I'll cut into it too much. And you can proceed with this for as short as you would like it to go. Meaning if a 1.5 is short enough around the edges, you don't have to continue blending out. But I'm just going to keep dropping guards until I run out of real estate here. So you can see what I've just created is basically a graduated shape going from super short to slightly longer. And that's really all you're doing with the clipper is just kind of building that weight up towards the parietal ridge. All right, from what I can tell, it looks like we're pretty close to there. Anybody need another minute or so with this? Awesome. Now what you'll notice is, since we stopped our 3.5, somewhere around this range here, everything above that is totally disconnected. But it's easier for me to use clipper over comb or just use my fingers to cut that into play. So I'm going to switch back to my clipper comb. And remember, the teeth of the comb are like your fingers. So I want to enter the hair and then guide the teeth of the comb out to how I would use my fingers. And then the blade of the clipper is just going to come in and take off whatever's unnecessary. So the teeth go in, they guide out to where you want them to live, and then the comb goes, or the clipper goes flat across to help guide that into place. And then we're going to drive that all the way through in towards the nape of the neck to clean up what we didn't already cut, but making sure to blend it into what we did. So just using the teeth of the comb to guide you all the way. Remember, as soon as the teeth are in the wrong position, they'll dig into the rest of the haircut, which is not our goal. Then I'm just using the camera as my mirror so I can see the line and make sure that it's nice and balanced. Now, once you've gotten to a level where you're comfortable with that side, we're going to switch to the opposite and do the exact same feeling on the opposite side. So while it's fresh in your brain, just repeat the same steps. Start with your 3.5 or whatever size blade you chose, and then slowly taper your way down until you run out of hair. Making sure to use that flicking motion to protect the hair above the section so we don't cut too much off. Remember, when you're around the ear, if you have to, kick up on one tooth and ride around it so that we can protect that length. And if you're having trouble seeing what you're working with every once in a while, make sure and step back. Because when you're too close to the hair, you'll tend to lose the vision on what you're shooting for. And you can get consumed with one small little piece of hair instead of really seeing the whole generic picture. And remember, every time you drop down the blade, only come right below where you were before. That way you protect the line you've already popped in, preserving the weight where you wanted to put it in the first place. So this becomes a very rhythmic haircut. Once you get into the motion of it, you just get smooth with your control, and it's easy to continue following the same steps over and over and over. Basically, the more you do a haircut like this, the better you're going to get, because you just get really good at the same motion over and over and over. Remember, when you switch towards your clipper over comb, at the teeth of the comb help to guide the hair where you want it to live. And then the teeth of the clipper, just trim it to that length. So you'll start to notice, even though we've cut these two haircuts independent, the top of the first haircut can actually work really, really well with the shorter length of the second haircut, right? So it's not about one versus the other. It's about how can they complement each other. And then every step of the way, you tend to add more and more. So the only thing that I would do different is probably blend in the very back end of the first haircut into the second haircut. And then they could be the exact same feel, just one more dramatic than the other. But while we're here, we're going to go ahead and cut the top into a second haircut whenever you guys are ready. And my favorite brush of choice when you guys are working with a haircut like this, a lot of guys don't tend to use tools on their hair, so the more you can train them, the better. A round brush for a good pompadour action would be great, but it's hard to talk a guy into round brushing his hair. So I tend to use the 407 styling brush because it does have enough bristles to really get the grip and movement, but it also has that half moon base so that you can get curvature when you pick the hair up. So it's almost like a round brush and a paddle brush put together. So it makes it a lot easier to kind of show people how to work with. Is there anything you can do to help guys understand how to style their hair? Because they're usually not taught how to do it. And the more you can coach them, the better off. So it looks like everybody's just about there. I see one pair of clippers still running. Any questions on what we did with the clipper work on the sides and the back? Awesome. Alicia, it looks like you took your clipper work a little taller. Did you do that on purpose, or is that just a choice on where you wanted your clippers to go?
Yeah, I've been keeping it a little bit longer, like
Awesome.
starting with the Pixies and everything. So
No, that's cool. I like those different division lines just because it gives it either more of a like a modern mohawk feel or a pompadour. Kind of gives you different looks. All right, we're ready to move to the top again. So I'm just going to put a little bit more moisture on here just to have the hair easy to control. So we're going to do that same division line that we did before, where we're going to separate directly across the apex of the head from ear to ear. That way we can focus on the crown first and then move in towards the top of the head. The difference in how we're going to approach it is I want to crop the top quite shorter by comparison. So I'm actually going to start in the diagonal back of my crown, and I'm going to work all the way across, and then I'm going to switch to the opposite side and work all the way across. So it's going to take the connection point shorter through here, but then give me a little bit more length in towards the center of the haircut. So the way that's going to look is I'm just going to come directly across diagonally. And I'm going to choose my length based off of where we stopped our clipper work. So it's going to be much shorter than where we were. So you can see where your clipper work was in the very crown area. And we'll use that length line. And I'm going to cut flat across. Just pulling straight out from the section angle that we took. So it's that diagonal feel. It's still going to have a little disconnection point, but it's going to blend in there much softer. And we'll keep taking diagonal sections and directing the hair towards the same position until we run out of hair to cut. And when we run out of hair to cut, we're going to flip to the opposite side of the head and repeat the same steps until we run out of hair to cut. And that's going to make sure that the crown balances from side to side. So utilizing your guide from the previous cut section. Remember to move your fingers every time you cross over the second knuckle. And that'll make sure that you're always directing the hair to the position you want to be. Because if we try to cut the whole section in one, we're going to tend to condense inside where our knuckles are. And then we're going to cut a heavier weight line towards the end of our section. We're getting pretty close to the last here. Just elevating flat off the head shape and following the same previously cut line. You can see how I'm blending into the clipper work we did, but still preserving length in towards the crown. So I'll switch to the opposite side and we'll repeat the same process. So working on that diagonal backwards and using the clipper work as my target towards the back. I'm going to flip my body position so you guys can see where I'm actually cutting. Flat off the head, follow the same target line until we cross over the center back. And that way you get a good blend all the way through the whole crown. So once you've got the crown done, we can move in towards the top of the head. Everybody ready for the top?
Not quite, sorry.
No, that's okay. Just checking. was very strange. Okay, how are we looking? Ready to roll? So I'm facing the mannequin head towards you because the way we're going to work through the top is we're going to visualize this in 3 separate panels: the middle, the left, and the right. So we're going to start with the center, and I'll just comb out enough hair that I can control. And I find the easiest way to prevent from combing over that is just to clip those out of the way, just to make sure you don't keep picking up hair you don't want to. And then we're going to create a soft shape. So flat across the top. Then we're going to work to the left side and round it off, and then to the right side and round it off to help keep the balance. So we can start in towards where we finished at the crown. I'm going to tilt this forward so you guys can see a little bit. I'll take a straight across section. I'm going to elevate it straight up from where it lives, and I'm going to connect the dots from side to side. So just straight, flat across. And then I'm going to move forward a section and use what we just cut as our target for the next section, straight up from where it lives. And I'm going to continue all the way through this little mini mohawk until I run out of hair in the front, just combing straight up from where it lives and using what we previously cut as our guide and cut flat across. So just remember to work in nice clean sections. Keep it easy for you to see. That way you can make sure that your guide is easy to follow. And then every section mimics the previous. When you're in the salon, stand sideways on your mirror so that you can see the elevation and the direction of each section, because that'll be the easiest way for you to check if you're in the right space or not. And if you need to, you can always come back through that panel horizontally and just do a little quick cross check. Make sure nothing weird happened. Now, once you're done with that center line, we can drop the section to the left. And the only thing that changes is instead of flat across, we're going to be flat out from where the panel lives. So just a subtle change, which will help round off this section and prevent it from getting super weighty right across the parietal. So our fingers pull out from where the section lives, and then we cut flat across. Moving forward one section at a time, straight out from where it lives, and flat across. This little length change will help make sure that the haircut's easy to style without it getting too heavy on the edges. These disconnected haircuts are really stylish and easy for men to work with, but if they get really long, it tends to look like it was a mistake and they're hard for them to handle at home. So it's still connected to the top panel, just on an angle to soften that edge. And then of course you'll do the same on the right side, still standing behind your work because it's going to make it easy for you to control. Using the top as a guide, but making sure that your fingers pull straight out from where the panel lives. Now, once again, you can come back through horizontally to do a quick cross check and make sure everything blends well. Remember, you shouldn't be so much cross cutting. If you see a major change, you want to go back to where the haircut was created and adjust that change from there. But just any little minor peaks and valleys that you want to do an adjustment to, that would be a great time to get them done. So while you guys are finishing, I'm going to use a little bit of grooming spray. It's like a perfect prep spray to get ready for the style in a men's haircut. I find for people that go to work during the day, they want one image while they're working and then maybe a different image when they go back out at night. This is an exceptional way to start your style. And then you can always layer product on as the day progresses, change the image. We're just using that 407 to give a little bit of rounded lift through the front line. And then blending through the crown to keep it a little bit more flat. Basically, the 407 brush is as if you were using a comb, but there's 9 rows of comb. So it gives you a little bit more tension, makes it easier to show the hair where you want it to go. And like I said, with that half crescent base, the ability to be able to shape and move the hair where you want it. And then for a little bit more control and more of a matte style finish, I'll finish this off with the dry paste. And dry paste has that clay style production to it to where you can get that separation and that pieciness out of it. But being more of a matte finish, it gives that drier texture to the edges. So once again, I'll work it through my hands like lotion so that I can use my fingers to distribute the product where I want it to go. And then as soon as my fingers are empty, you can reload through. And that way you don't wind up with too much product in one spot and not enough everywhere else. And I like hair to have the same textural factor from front to back. So even all the little short pieces should get enough product to where they look like they're the same shine factor or movement as the rest. And of course, I've got this pompadour up, but this style could be worn down. And I think it's kind of fun, especially on all hair types, to show people multiple ways to style their own hair. You don't want people to get one haircut. You want them to have one haircut that has 3 different looks to it. So they know 3 different types of product to use, 3 different ways to move it and change it. You don't want them to be stuck with the same feeling all the time. So with this one, obviously we did our clipper line where we slowly worked our 3.5 from that temporal area and then dipped down in towards the nape of the neck to help create that bit of shape. We followed right underneath with the number 2, underneath with a 1.5, underneath with a 1, until we blended out to a nice short tapered feel around the edges. We repeated on the same feeling on both sides. That way we get that same shape and that same movement all the way through. The adjustment on this is you would take a look at the crown and the nape area, right? You want that occipital ridge to be defined but not protruding. So if a guest already has a protrusion of occipital, I would take my clipper slightly higher up on the high occipital to flatten that area out a bit more. If they're flatter in the crown, I might graduate that a smidge more so that I can build more shape in through the crown to amplify it some. Obviously, if they're super dense in texture, you can always soften that by point cutting or using thinning scissors, or even cutting with a razor on men's hair is a lot of fun, depending on the shape and texture you're shooting for. And then remember, through the crown, we use a diagonal backward placement, and we use the top of our clipper work as a guideline to run through the crown area on that diagonal on both sides to blend it through so that it all melts. And then 3 different panels through the top, the center one flat like a mohawk, the left on a slight lean to follow the panel, and then the right on a slight lean to follow that panel. So you still got disconnected hair, but it's not so dramatic that there's a strong weight line living on the side. And then of course, fun with styling aids, I love the grooming spray as a prep spray. It's also exceptional as its own just blowout spray. And the fragrance alone always gets people. And then whether you need the clay base for that dry finish, or if you wanted to move more towards a grooming pomade or original pomade to help add more of a shine factor and different dimension, I always judge that depending on the guest's texture and their color of hair. And then if they want more of a wet look or a dry finish. But Maverick has a lot of different products to play off of and different dimensions you can get. And I always feel it's nice for people to understand multiple ways to wear their hair. So I don't tend to just teach guys how to use one. I'll rotate through to give them different images and different styles. And every time they come through, maybe blow it dry a little different way to help them see it. And here again, like we mentioned earlier, I think having something like an Instagram or YouTube or Facebook, there's just so much image out there where you can get different ideas and be inspired in different ways. Technique-wise, it's about getting comfortable with the tools. So the more you work with clippers, the better you're going to work with clippers. The more you study your craft and see in the mirror, like, do you see shadows? Do you see peaks of weight? Things that I could adjust, the more quality and clean your work's going to get. But men's grooming has always been growing. It's at an exceptional rate. It's a lot of fun. I like the diversity in the salon. It's one of the beauty things about what we do is you're not stuck doing the exact same haircut every day for the rest of your life. So you want to have that change. And if nothing else, cutting men's hair will teach you to get more and more aggressive as a hair cutter. Do you guys have any questions on what we just did with this haircut? So give me a kind of a feeling like we did this morning. Now that we've done 2 different men's haircuts, what did you like and what would you like to work on?
I like the first pixie cut that you showed us a lot.
Hang on just a sec. I can't really hear you very well. I don't know if that's me or.
It might be me. Can you hear me?
My volume's all the way up.
Can you hear me?
I don't know why I'm not hearing you. That's very strange.
Can you hear the others?
Yeah, I can hear Alicia.
Can you not hear any of them?
Tell you what, I'm going to turn down the volume on my phone and turn up the volume on my computer. Okay, let's try this.
We can't hear you now. Hello?
How's that? All right, can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, let's try that again. So who wants to start? Alicia, I think you're muted.
Yeah, Alicia, you're muted too.
Okay. I like the first pixie cut that we did. I just need to work on like cleaner sectioning and just really like taking a step back in between and making sure I don't get carried away.
Awesome.
I feel
Anybody
like
else?
I feel like with the men's cutting for me, like being that square shape, I feel like it's something I really need to work on because I feel like during the first cut it got kind of rounded, so it definitely looked more like a pixie versus like a traditional men's cut. So working on that and like where my body fits, stuff like that.
It's definitely something, like square is probably one of the most difficult because there's no in between. You know, it's all or nothing. So getting that shape really clean, it'll make a big difference in a lot of your work. But that's the beauty of our craft, is it continues to get better. So keep pushing on that one, because you'll see that in a lot of haircuts where you want to build, I hate to say corners, because really on a round head, there's no such thing as corners, but it's the illusion of corners.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's awesome. Who else?
I really like all of the techniques. I think I just need to practice more and get more comfortable with all of it. But it's nice to get my brain thinking like that, because I haven't done a men's cut in a very long time.
Did you see the correlation between the Pixies and the men's haircut?
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarity there. And really, that's kind of the point of this, is to push yourself to think about it a little bit different, but then have that position and angle and change, and, you know, give yourself somebody else's thought patterns, because these are 4 different haircuts, and I don't always cut hair like this, but I do this quite a bit. So it's a very usable technique behind the chair. And after that, like, the more you practice it, you'll find different lengths and different positions that you enjoy better than others. And that's where the change comes in. You're building your taste level. So that's awesome. Yeah, just keep working on it.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Well, once again, I really appreciate you guys spending the time with me. It's a lot of fun to kind of have these different perspectives. I like watching y'all work. It's a shame we couldn't be close enough to be hands in and really help each other. But, you know, for a couple of hours, that's not really a bad session. We pulled a lot together, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. So
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you
of
so much.
course, thanks, guys. Y'all have a great afternoon, and hopefully I'll see y'all very soon.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you.